Dawn hadn't broken when guns were checked in silence. Names already marked, the air tight with betrayal, because a meeting promised peace while everyone knew bodies would be required. Night still owned Medellin. The city looked calm from above. Lights scattered, radios low, dogs quiet, but men were already awake. Boots pulled on without hurry, magazines filled by touch, not sight. No one joked, no one prayed out loud. Across different neighborhoods the same preparation unfolded, weapons laid on tables, names folded into pockets, instructions memorized, then burned. By dawn, 25 men would be armed and placed where they could not be ignored. Pablo Escobar did not rush. He sat inside a familiar room, one window open, the city breathing below him. He listened more than he spoke. Reports came in fragments: who had been contacted, who had disappeared for the night, who was suddenly unreachable. Silence carried more meaning than words. He understood the shape of the threat. Enemies believed they could erase the future by erasing witnesses. 300 voices reduced to none. No testimony, no leverage, no need for negotiation. A solution brutal enough to end discussion. Escobar did not raise his voice. He thought about control, about timing. Violence was useful, but only when it arrived late enough to feel inevitable. Too early and it looked desperate. Too loud and it invited unity against him. A man stood near the door waiting, loyal, afraid, both. "Nothing moves yet," the man said. Escobar nodded. That was expected. Violence always liked to pretend it wasn't coming. He walked to the window. Below, Medellin waited without knowing for what. This city had learned his rhythms. When Escobar stayed quiet, people listened harder. When he delayed action, fear filled the gap. He thought of the government meeting ahead, polished tables, clean suits. Men who spoke of law while measuring their chances of survival. They wanted calm. He wanted permanence. The witnesses were not just people, they were pressure. Whoever controlled them controlled the conversation. A message arrived, short, confirmed, lists existed, routes mapped. Dawn chosen for efficiency. Escobar closed his eyes briefly. He did not order immediate blood. Instead, he sent instructions that sounded almost gentle. Positions adjusted. Men told to wait. Others told to be seen but not act. He allowed rumors to spread just enough to slow the hands that wanted killing. Fear works best when it hesitates. Outside, engines turned over. Somewhere, a mother felt uneasy without knowing why. Somewhere else, a man reconsidered leaving his house. Escobar returned to his chair. He knew that by morning, everyone would understand something had shifted, even if no shots were fired yet. Control was being asserted not through gunfire but through restraint. He lit nothing, drank nothing, just waited. Because before the sun rose, Medellin would learn that violence was only one option, and not always the one he chose. The building was clean in a way that felt dishonest. Marble floors, soft lights. Men who lowered their voices without realizing why. Pablo Escobar walked through security without resistance, because resistance had already been calculated and dismissed. No one searched him thoroughly. They never did. He entered the room alone. The others were already seated. Ministers, advisors, intermediaries who survived by pretending they were neutral. Files stacked neatly as if paper could protect them. Escobar did not smile. He took his seat and waited for someone else to speak first. Power reveals itself in patience. A government man cleared his throat. He spoke about stability, about fatigue, about Colombia bleeding too long. His words were careful, rehearsed, meant to sound brave. Escobar listened without interrupting. He noticed hands. One man gripped a pen too tightly. Another kept adjusting his cuff. Fear leaked through small movements. It always did. "You want an end," Escobar said calmly. The room stilled. His voice was not loud, it didn't need to be. "You want fewer bombs, fewer funerals, fewer names on walls." No one corrected him. He leaned back slightly, not relaxed, measured, "I can give you that," he continued, "but order is not free." A pause, long enough to force them to imagine what disorder looked like again. They spoke of law, of extradition, of witnesses who needed protection. The words sounded clean. Escobar let them finish, let them believe they were leading. Then he spoke again. "Witnesses are not people," he said. "They are leverage. Whoever protects them controls the future." That landed harder than any threat. One official tried to push back, spoke about justice, about international pressure. Escobar turned his eyes toward him slowly, without anger. "Pressure breaks weak structures," Escobar said. "Strong ones absorb it." Silence returned. He offered them a vision, not peace, control, reduced violence selectively applied, fewer headlines, fewer panicked investors, in exchange boundaries, clear ones, no extradition. No sudden arrests dressed as victories, no games played behind his back. Fear and loyalty sat side by side at the table. They asked what would happen if enemies acted anyway. Escobar answered without hesitation. "Then I will respond," he said, "quietly if possible, completely if necessary." No one doubted him. By the time the meeting ended, no papers were signed. None were needed. What existed now was understanding. Fragile, dangerous, binding. As Escobar stood to leave, one man realized something too late. This was not a negotiation to end violence. It was permission to control it. Outside, Medellín moved as usual. Traffic, voices, life continuing unaware that its future had just been narrowed by men who believed fear was a tool, not a curse. Escobar stepped into the waiting car. He did not look back. Because he knew the hardest part was still ahead, not convincing the government, but ensuring everyone else understood who truly decided when the killing would begin. The problem with silence is that it invites imagination. Across the city, men who did not attend the meeting felt the absence immediately. Phones went unanswered, promises stalled, orders softened. That kind of quiet made experienced criminals nervous. They gathered in back rooms and safe houses, not to celebrate, to plan. Lists were unfolded on scratched tables. Names written in careful handwriting, not enemies, witnesses, drivers, accountants, girlfriends who talked too much, men who might decide that survival required honesty. 300 lives reduced to strategy. These were not reckless men. They believed they were being practical. If the future depended on silence, then silence had to be enforced before the state could pretend it controlled anything. They spoke about dawn. Early light created confusion. People half awake. Streets empty enough for efficiency, busy enough to disappear into. The kind of violence that left no witnesses because the witnesses were the target. Word traveled, slowly, unevenly. Someone always heard first. A cousin, a neighbor, a man who owed a favor. Fear moved faster than bullets. Doors stayed closed longer than usual. People chose not to attend work, not to answer knocks, not to trust sudden kindness. Escobar heard everything, not from spies alone, from the city itself. Tension had a sound. He recognized it. Medellín had learned to breathe differently when blood was being scheduled. He did not summon his enemies. He let them believe they were early. Instead, he spoke to his own people, not with rage. With clarity. If they erase the witnesses, he said, they erase our leverage. If they erase leverage, they erase us. That was enough. Loyalty revealed itself in small acts. A route blocked for no reason, a weapon that failed inspection, a message delayed just long enough to ruin timing. Escobar did not order the lists destroyed. He ordered them exposed, not publicly. Quietly, names reached the ears of those who mattered. Fear began to fracture the plan. Some men hesitated. Others reconsidered who would be blamed if the bodies piled too high. Killing 300 people required unity. Fear dissolves unity. By nightfall, the certainty was gone. Some guns were still loaded, some men still committed. But doubt had entered the rooms where confidence had lived hours before. Escobar remained still. He understood that enemies were most dangerous when they believed they were acting independently. So he let them feel alone. Some would pull back, some would push forward. Either way, the balance would change. And when dawn arrived, Medellin would not be quieter, it would be divided. Between those who still believed violence solved everything, and those who had begun to understand that Escobar was no longer reacting to events. He was arranging outcomes. Morning came without explosions. That was the first shock. People woke expecting sirens, smoke, the familiar proof that something had gone wrong. Instead, the streets filled slowly. Shops opened halfway, radios stayed low, everyone listened for what wasn't happening. The absence of violence felt deliberate. Escobar watched from a distance, not from a palace. From places where he could sense the mood without being seen. He understood that restraint unsettled men more than gunfire. Violence explained itself. Silence demanded interpretation. His enemies felt it first. Orders had been given, then questioned. Men arrived at positions and were told to wait. Waiting bred doubt. Doubt bred fear. Fear fractured loyalty. Some called their superiors. Some never received answers. Escobar's name surfaced in whispers, not attached to threats, attached to questions. Why hasn't he moved? What does he know? Who already knows our names? Power settled into the city like humidity, invisible, inescapable. Escobar sent no public message, no statement, no warning. He allowed uncertainty to do the work. The government noticed too. Officials who had expected immediate backlash found themselves explaining a calm they couldn't control. They mistook it for cooperation. Escobar did not correct them. Behind closed doors, his people moved carefully. Not fast, carefully. Certain men were reassured, others were isolated. Loyalty was rewarded with protection. Fear was left to rot on its own. A man who obeys because he is afraid is useful. A man who obeys because he believes there is no alternative is permanent. By midday, some of the lists were already useless. Names crossed out. Plans abandoned. A few men disappeared, not killed, just removed from relevance. That frightened the rest more than bodies ever could. Escobar understood something the others did not. Control did not require constant proof. It required belief. Medellin began to adjust its expectations. People sensed that a line had been drawn somewhere they could not see. Conversations shortened. Jokes stopped. Even criminals watched their words. Escobar stayed quiet because the city was learning again. Learning that when he did nothing, it was because doing nothing served him better than violence ever could. And that lesson would last longer than fear. By the second day, Medellin no longer expected an explosion. That was worse. People moved through the streets with measured steps. Conversations stayed practical. No one lingered. The city functioned, but without ease, like a body bracing for pain that hadn't arrived yet. Fear had matured. Those on the lists felt it most. Men who once believed proximity to power made them untouchable now understood how thin that protection was. Some tried to disappear. Others tried to trade loyalty for safety. A few reached for the state, believing the government still held answers. The government felt the pressure immediately. Phones rang constantly. Demands without signatures. Warnings without proof. Officials realized they were no longer negotiating with Escobar alone, but with the consequences of having done so. Witnesses needed reassurance. Protection required commitment. Commitment required courage. Courage was in short supply. Escobar did not interfere directly. He let the city reveal itself. Some witnesses chose silence again, not because they were threatened, but because survival had always been their true language. Others spoke just enough to stay relevant, but not enough to feel exposed. Fear refined their honesty. Escobar observed the shift with precision. This was the cost of power he understood well. When everyone is afraid, loyalty becomes transactional. When no one feels safe, control becomes centralized. All roads led back to him, not because he forced them to, but because alternatives collapsed under their own weight. In neighborhoods once loud with bravado, men stayed indoors. Weapons remained hidden. Violence became a rumor instead of a reality. That rumor carried Escobar's name more effectively than any gun. The city held its breath. Escobar knew this moment could not last forever. Pressure always demanded release. But he also knew something else. Every hour without blood strengthened his position. Every day without chaos made his enemies look reckless and his restraint look like leadership. Medellín was not peaceful. It was waiting. And waiting, he knew, was when the deepest damage was done, when fear stopped reacting and started obeying. The violence never arrived the way people expected. That was the final adjustment. Weeks passed, then months. The lists faded. Some names survived, others did not, but quietly, without spectacle. Men were removed from the story without becoming headlines. Their absence was noticed only by those who depended on them. Escobar understood legacy better than his enemies. Anyone could rule through chaos. Chaos burns fast. What lasts is structure, fear organized into habit, loyalty shaped by inevitability. The government learned this too late. They spoke of agreements as if they were temporary. Escobar treated them as precedent. Every compromise set a standard. Every concession widened the space he occupied. Institutions bent not because they were weak, but because they wanted to keep functioning. That was their mistake. Witnesses became ghosts, some protected, some forgotten. Some absorbed back into the city, quieter than before. Justice remained theoretical. Control was real. Escobar did not celebrate. He watched what he had created with the detachment of a man who understood cost. Medellín no longer panicked at every rumor. It calculated. Children learned which streets to avoid without being told why. Fear was inherited. This was not victory. It was consequence. Escobar's power hardened the state even as it hollowed it out. Men learned to survive by cooperating, by looking away, by justifying silence as pragmatism. Moral lines blurred until they disappeared entirely. Years later, people would argue about who allowed him to become what he was. They would miss the point. Power like Escobar's does not arrive alone. It is invited, fed, normalized. Sustained by those who choose order over justice, quiet over truth. When it ended, as all control eventually does, it left behind habits that did not disappear with the man. Fear lingered. Loyalty remained conditional. And Medellín carried the memory forward, not as history, but as instinct. Because the most lasting violence Escobar ever delivered was not what he ordered. It was what he taught others to accept.